Have you ever heard of a man so feared, so seductive, and so mysteriously powerful, that he was called both a saint and the devil in the same breath? Not a king, not a general, not a nobleman, but a wandering peasant who clawed his way from a frozen Siberian village to the heart of the Russian Empire. His name was Grigori Rasputin, and his story is more unbelievable than fiction. Grigori Rasputin wasn't born into greatness. He wasn't even born into comfort. He came into this world in 1869 in the frigid village of Pokrovskoye in the middle of Siberia, a region infamous not just for its winters, but as a dumping ground for Russia's exiles and criminals. Survival there wasn't expected, it was earned. Of the 7 siblings born before him, none survived infancy. Rasputin did, and from the start it was clear he was different. As a child, he claimed to have divine visions and prophetic dreams. In any other place, he might have been dismissed or institutionalized. But in rural 19th century Russia, where faith and fear danced together, such claims could crown you a prophet or a monster. Locals said he could heal animals with the touch, that he saw angels, that he knew things he shouldn't possibly know. Whether it was supernatural intuition or masterful observation, the villagers couldn't explain it. So many chose to believe it. But just as easily as he was believed to be blessed, he was also feared. Even as a young man, Rasputin walked a razor's edge between piety and chaos. He was said to steal drink excessively and had a magnetic, if volatile, personality. At 28, he was married with 4 children, yet by all accounts unfaithful and abusive. One day, after stealing a horse, Rasputin fled to a monastery to escape punishment. That's where things took a fateful turn. Whether through guilt or manipulation, Rasputin presented himself as a man ready to be reformed. He befriended a monk named Makary, his first true mentor, and took on the life of a wanderer, spreading his vision of faith from village to village. But here's where it gets dark. Along these spiritual travels, he likely encountered a secretive religious cult called the Klisti, a radical sect of Russian Orthodoxy who believed that sin must be purged through ecstatic rituals. These ceremonies were no ordinary worship. Members would choke themselves into euphoria, fall into frenzied dances, speak in tongues, and at the height of spiritual release engage in communal orgies to purge their flesh of sin. Rasputin's religious views were never orthodox. But after meeting groups like these, his message evolved or corrupted. He began preaching a dangerous gospel that salvation came through sin, that spiritual enlightenment was best reached through indulgence, not abstinence. This belief didn't stay in the woods. Rasputin returned home, changed, no longer just a wandering mystic. He began gathering followers in his own basement, transforming it into a spiritual salon of sorts. His sermons, his stares, his reputation for having God's ear all made him intoxicating. To many, he was the second coming, to others the Antichrist. But how did a foul-smelling monk with no noble blood or formal education go from healing horses in Siberia to whispering secrets in the halls of the Russian Empire? It wasn't just mysticism, it was timing, charisma, and powerful connections. Rasputin's former mentor, Makary, as fate would have it, had once advised members of the Romanov family that one thread combined with Russia's growing desperation for spiritual guidance would unravel history itself. By the early 1900s, Rasputin was no longer just a strange man with visions. He had become a phenomenon. His followers believed he could heal the sick, summon divine visions, and even forgive sins by helping them commit them. But what Rasputin lacked in education or refinement, he made up for in something more dangerous: charisma. He wasn't interested in titles or theology. He wanted influence. and he was about to get more of it than he could ever imagine. In a moment of claimed revelation, Rasputin announced that the Virgin Mary had appeared to him in a vision instructing him to go to St. Petersburg to save the royal family. To anyone else, this would sound delusional. But Rasputin wasn't just anyone anymore. By this time, his old monastery mentor Makary, who had once advised the Romanovs, still held weight in religious circles. Rasputin used that connection to get letters of introduction and made the long trek from Siberia to the capital. He arrived at the gates of Russia's holy elite as a bearded, unwashed mystic wearing peasant rags. He smelled like sweat and smoke, and his stare was unsettling. But when he looked someone in the eyes, they said it felt like being possessed, and that power brought him access. He first met with senior church figures, men of deep faith and deeper skepticism. But when Rasputin seemingly cured a noblewoman's chronic illness by merely laying hands on her rumors, exploded, "A living saint walks among us." From there, doors opened quickly, especially the ones that should have stayed closed. Rasputin was introduced to Princess Milika and Princess Anastasia of Montenegro, two eccentric women obsessed with the occult, nicknamed the Crow Sisters. Due to their hooked noses and dark interests, they believed Rasputin was a prophet sent to fulfill Russia's divine destiny. And these weren't just any royals. The sisters had married into the Romanov dynasty, giving them direct access to Tsar Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra. For years, Alexandra Romanov had suffered immense pressure and anxiety. She had given birth to 4 daughters, but what the monarchy desperately needed was a male heir. When she finally bore a son, Alexei, joy turned quickly to dread. The boy had hemophilia, a disease that turned a simple bruise into a death sentence. Worse still, this condition had to be hidden from the public. A weak heir meant a weak empire. The empress had once relied on a mystic healer named Dr. Philippe, who assured her that another holy man would soon take his place. When Rasputin arrived at the palace led by the Crow Sisters, she began to wonder if prophecy had found its man. Still, she hesitated. But one night, everything changed. Alexei fell. He began to bleed internally and wouldn't stop. Doctors panicked. Servants whispered. The empress was breaking. Then Rasputin showed up at the palace gates, uninvited, unaware supposedly of what had happened. He claimed that a voice from heaven told him the child was dying and that he was the only one who could save him. Coincidence? Perhaps he'd heard from the sisters, but to Alexandra it was divine intervention. Rasputin placed his hands on the boy, prayed and ordered the doctors to stop all medications. Miraculously, Alexei stabilized. Historians today think Rasputin unknowingly saved him by stopping the use of aspirin, a drug that worsens hemophilia. To the empress, this was proof Rasputin was God's messenger. From that moment on, Rasputin wasn't just a guest, he was family. He called the Tsar and Tsarina Papa and Mama. He joined their children for prayers and bedtime stories. He gave Alexandra sedatives for her anxiety and the Tsar narcotics for his stress. He claimed they were gifts from God, miracle cures for a modern world. In reality, he was making them addicts. Behind closed doors, he was their trusted advisor. In public, his reputation was chaos. Rumors spread of orgies, bribery, and cult rituals. Nobles were horrified to see a peasant with muddy boots sitting next to the empress. But every scandal only deepened the royal couple's trust in him. They believed the hatred came from jealousy, or worse, betrayal of the divine will. The press, of course, had a field day. One satirical paper printed an illustration of Rasputin tucking the Tsar's daughters into bed with a sly smirk. Another claimed he bathed with prostitutes, cursed priests, and smelled like a dying goat. But nothing stuck, because behind every closed door, Alexandra was always there, defending him. Even when a maid accused him of rape. Even when a nanny begged to keep him away from the girls. Even when the royal court whispered that the Russian Empire was being run by a mad monk in sandals. They weren't wrong. While Russia was bleeding at the front lines of World War I, the real battlefield was back at home, and Rasputin held the throne in everything but name. Tsar Nicholas had left the capital to command the army directly, and in his absence he handed over day-to-day power to his wife Alexandra. And Alexandra, she answered to one man, Rasputin. As millions of soldiers perished in the trenches, Rasputin was in the palace whispering in the empress's ear. When one minister disappointed him, Rasputin had him removed. When another flattered him, Rasputin promoted him, no matter how incompetent. In 2 years, Rasputin was responsible for the rise and fall of over a dozen government ministers. The Russian political system became a revolving door of sycophants, mystics and cowards. Worse still, the public knew. Newspapers were no longer just mocking him. They were accusing him of corruption, treason and spiritual manipulation. Cartoons showed him pulling puppet strings with the Romanovs dangling helplessly. But Alexandra wouldn't listen. She believed Rasputin was the only one who truly understood divine will. And for that, she trusted him more than generals, doctors, or advisors. The people, meanwhile, were starving. The cost of bread had doubled. Factories were shutting down. Fathers never returned from war, and mothers waited in line for food that never arrived. All the while, Rasputin bathed in wine and women. In his journals, he claimed he still fought a spiritual battle inside himself. Good versus evil, but to most observers, evil was winning. His apartment in St. Petersburg had become a den of delusion. Devoted women visited him weekly, bringing hot food, kissing his feet, and calling him Christ. Some even left their husbands and children to serve him full-time. And Rasputin took everything they offered. Police spies followed him. They saw him hire prostitutes daily, take them to bathhouses, beat them, sleep with them, and leave unwashed. He'd scream at demons only he could see, then return to the palace and bless the Tsarina's children. The contradiction was maddening. 2 Orthodox bishops, Hermogen and Iliador, who once helped Rasputin rise, now tried to stop him. They confronted him, accused him of using demonic powers, and even assaulted him with a giant crucifix. Rasputin barely survived, but instead of being humbled, he tattled. The empress had the bishops exiled. One of them, Iliador, fled to Finland dressed as a woman to escape arrest. Rasputin decided he needed a break from the city and returned to his home village to recover. But he didn't know a plan was already in motion. That same Bishop Iliador believed Rasputin was the Antichrist. So he hired a broken woman, Kionia Guseva, a prostitute whose face had been mutilated by a past abuser, to do what no noble dared. She waited outside Rasputin's house looking pitiful and devout. Rasputin approached her to offer alms. She stabbed him in the stomach. Then again and again until his intestines spilled out onto the dirt. The world didn't even have time to react because that very day, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. World War I had officially begun. Russia entered the war leaderless, divided, and under the spell of a dying mystic. From his hospital bed, Rasputin wrote a chilling letter to Tsar Nicholas. Do not go to war. We will all drown in blood. The disaster is great, the misery infinite. But Nicholas didn't listen. The Tsar saw glory. He saw salvation in battle. What he didn't see was the end of his dynasty. And as the empire stumbled blindly toward revolution, Rasputin returned to the capital, healed but changed. He knew something had shifted. He wrote again to the empress with eerie finality. If one of your relatives brings about my death, then none of your family will remain alive for more than 2 years. They will all be killed by the Russian people. I have paid for them with my blood. In private, he confessed to friends that his visions were darker, that he saw fire consuming palaces, blood running through streets, and the children of kings falling to mobs. He believed he would die soon, and history was ready to oblige. By late 1916, Grigori Rasputin had made enemies in every corner of Russian power. To the nobles, he was an embarrassment. To the church, a heretic. To the people, a devil in a monk's robe. But to the empress, he was still divine. So if the empire couldn't stop him through politics or through prayer, there was only one option left: murder. The conspiracy began within the palace walls. Among the aristocrats who wanted Rasputin gone, one name stood out: Prince Felix Yusupov. Rich, well-connected, and flamboyant, Yusupov was married to the Tsar's niece, Princess Irina, famed for her beauty. Yusupov had heard too many whispers: Rasputin seducing royal daughters, Rasputin bathing with prostitutes, Rasputin poisoning the empire. But what really pushed him over the edge was personal. Rasputin had hinted that even Irina Yusupov's own wife wasn't immune to his healing touch. Yusupov made a plan. Together with several high-ranking nobles, a nationalist politician, and even a cousin of the Tsar, they arranged to lure Rasputin into a trap, the bait. An exclusive visit to Yusupov's mansion and a chance to heal Irina. On December 30th, 1916, Rasputin was picked up in a car and driven through the snowy streets of Petrograd. He arrived at the palace thinking he was about to perform his sacred duty, but what awaited him was death. They led him into a lavish basement dining room. Cakes were served, wine was poured, laced with cyanide. Rasputin ate and drank and smiled. Nothing happened. Hours passed. Yusupov began to panic. Was the poison fake, or was the legend true? Was Rasputin truly unkillable? Terrified, Yusupov rushed upstairs, grabbed a revolver, and came back down. Rasputin stood calmly, no fear, no begging, just a cold, unreadable stare. A single gunshot rang out. Rasputin fell. Yusupov sighed in relief. But the story wasn't over. While the conspirators celebrated upstairs, something stirred in the dark. Yusupov returned to check the body. He leaned in. Rasputin opened his eyes. With a roar, he lunged forward, bleeding, broken but alive. The doctor fainted on the spot. Yusupov screamed and ran upstairs. The others raced down just in time to see Rasputin crawling up the basement steps, escaping into the snowy courtyard. They fired again and again. 5 bullets, 1 to the head. Rasputin collapsed. His body was dumped in the trunk of a car and driven to the frozen Neva River. There they cut a hole in the ice and shoved him into the water. But when his corpse was recovered days later, something was wrong. His hands were up, pressed against the underside of the ice. His lungs were filled with water. He hadn't died from poison or gunshots. He had drowned. The public was stunned. The nobles were relieved. And the empress, devastated. She refused to believe it at first. She blamed the enemies of God. She even kept Rasputin's prophecies close, especially the last one. If I die at the hands of your kin, none of your family will survive. And 2 years later, that prophecy came true. The Russian Revolution exploded. The Tsar was overthrown. And in a brutal massacre, the Romanovs' father, mother, daughters, and young Alexei were executed in a basement. The dynasty was over. And Rasputin, the filthy mystic from Siberia, had outlasted them all. Only one thing remained. Rasputin's body, dug up by revolutionaries, was burned to ash. But before the flames took him, rumor says that soldiers cut off his penis and preserved it in a jar, believing it held supernatural power. It now sits in a museum in St. Petersburg. Some visit it with reverence, others with disbelief. But none can deny that Grigori Rasputin, a man who claimed to be the second coming of Christ, left behind a trail of prophecy, sex, and death so bizarre, even history struggles to explain it. Rasputin is remembered as many things: a prophet, a conman, a madman, a saint, a devil. But maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous thing he ever was believed. How did a poor peasant from Siberia come to control one of the most powerful empires in the world? How did he walk through the halls of royalty barefoot while kings bowed to him in secret? Was it magic, hypnosis, divine power? Or was it something far simpler yet infinitely more terrifying? Charisma. Rasputin didn't seize power, it was handed to him by desperate people clinging to hope, by nobles too arrogant to confront him early, and by a Tsarina too broken to let him go. And in that vacuum of fear and superstition, Rasputin didn't just survive, he thrived. But his rise wasn't just the story of one man. It was a mirror reflecting the cracks in an entire system. The Romanov Empire wasn't brought down by Rasputin alone. It was already falling corrupt, rigid, disconnected from its people. He simply hastened the collapse, a mystical parasite on a decaying host. Even today, the myths haven't stopped. Some claim Rasputin had real healing powers. Others insist he was a demon in human flesh. Some whisper he predicted the rise of communism, the Cold War, even the fall of the Soviet Union. Museums hold his letters. Cultists chant his name, and his severed genitals preserved in a jar are treated like relics. But here's the real power of Rasputin's story. It warns us that charisma can be deadlier than any weapon, that blind faith can be more dangerous than any revolution, that when truth bends to emotion, monsters don't need to hide. They walk in through the front door uninvited, and they never leave. So next time someone claims to speak for God, next time a voice promises healing in exchange for devotion, or when a leader surrounds themselves not with experts but with sycophants, ask yourself, are they here to help, or are they Rasputin wearing a new face? History never repeats itself exactly, but it rhymes. And Rasputin's melody still echoes in churches, in palaces, and in every place where power meets desperation.